Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. I hope you are well. In the current session, I am going to share some characteristics of the vocabulary of Old English. I hope that after completing this session, you will be familiar with the distinct characteristics and the nature of the vocabulary of Old English. I assume that you already know how by using prefixes and suffixes and by making compounds, the vocabulary of Old English was enlarged. However, it is significant and important for us to understand what was the role of borrowing in this regard. So, Old English increased its vocabulary and enlarged its fund of vocabulary by adding words that were borrowed from other languages. These borrowed words were specially for the concepts and institutions of Christianity. Here I have on the screen a couple of examples for you. If you notice these two circles, these are actually the old words for the modern English word church. And actually the word is derived from the Greek word that meant house of the Lord. So you can see how by borrowing a Greek word and by modifying it in terms of graphical representation, a word was created. And again, as I said, it was related to Christianity. There were so many other words related to Christianity that were taken from Latin language or from Greek language. Here on the screen, I have some examples for you. Please notice these words. These are the Old English words. Here you can see the modern English equivalents, apostle and bishop. And actually, they have been derived from Latin language. The Latin word for them was this one. So the process of borrowing contributed a lot towards the vocabulary that was related to the domain of Christianity. Furthermore, you can see the word monk. Alright, just to give you a clarity, by the way, like we have Maulvi and Maulana and Qari and Hafiz, in the same way there are different categories and there are different positions in the Christian church. So you would have these words apostle, bishop, monk, etc. there. Another example is of the word Montessori, that was from the Latin word monasterium. By the way, there were some other words related to the domain of religion. For example, the word abbot, the word disciple, nun, pilgrim, pope, and school. And all these words have their origin in other languages. They were originally not from English language. Sometimes existing words were simply transferred to Christian use, as with Easter, notice hell and holy. So the words that were already there, they were transferred to a particular domain that is of Christianity. However, sometimes new words were coined from native elements. So some native element would be taken and it would be given shape and form to make a new word, to coin a new word. Look at the example that is given here. Latin word that I am underlining for you, evangelium, was rendered as gospel, which means good message, which has now become gospel in Old English. And actually from there, this point, it is taken to modern English as well. And we still use the word and we find the word in our current use. Notice another word, this trinitas, Trinity. It was rendered as trines or threeness. So the concept of Trinity is related to Christianity, and this is how the word was. You see, you can see this triangle to understand how the word was coined. Another important feature of the vocabulary of Old English was the rarity of words derived from Latin language, which is a surprise for us. But even bigger surprise for us is the absence of those words that are from French language. Well, my dear students, as a matter of fact, if you look at today's English, you would find more than half of the vocabulary of the total modern English is from French language, whereas in the Old English times, we do not find any such resources used for the enlargement of the vocabulary of Old English. The vocabulary of Old English actually is almost purely Germanic, and it is taken from Germanic language. A large part has now disappeared with the disappearance of the language. When the Norman conquest brought French into England as the language of the higher classes, much of the Old English vocabulary appropriate to literature and learning died out and was replaced later by words borrowed from French and Latin. And that is why today we have a lot of words from French and Latin if we look at the sources of the words of modern English. By the way, if you open an Old English dictionary, you would find 85% of the words have become obsolete, which means they are no longer in use. Those that survived, they are basically the words that are of very basic nature, and they provide information, or they are related to the basic elements of life. So they express fundamental concepts. For example, look at the slide. Look at the words that have survived. Modern English versions are given in parentheses: man, woman, and wife. By the way, in Old English, the word wife was used for woman, which included wife. But now its use is restricted to the spouse of a male only, and woman is something different from wife. Notice other words: child, house, wall, meat. Meat was used for food as well in those times, but now the word meat is used for a particular kind of food: grass and leaf. Here are some more words for your interest: fowl or bird, good, high, strong, eaten, which means eat, drinken, which means drink. So these are the words that have survived through the times, and this vocabulary is still used in the modern day English. I would say that Old English was not a very uniform language. There were differences in the language that was spoken at different time points during the history of Old English. And also the dialects varied from one part of this Old England to another part. So if you notice at the screen, you can see these 4 particular dialects, varieties of English with varieties of vocabulary that were spoken. They were Northumbrian, Mercian, West Saxon, and Kentish. And actually, each of them had certain features. Sometimes one would take over the other, sometimes the other would take over yet another, because of its development and enlargement of vocabulary and because of the power that would be related to the people of that area. But anyhow, each of these had its own distinctive features. Unfortunately, we know very less about them. For example, Kentish is known from still scantier remains and is the dialect that the Jutes of Southeast spoke. So we have some knowledge of the vocabulary of that. Whereas West Saxon, it was the dialect that was extensively available in terms of different texts that have been found. And actually, almost all of the Old English literature is transcribed in West Saxon. Here on the slide, you can see the map where I just want you to notice those areas where these people were living in the old times. You can notice Northumbrians, you can notice Mercians, you can notice West Saxons, and here you can notice Kentish as well. So because they were, each of them was living in a very distinct area that was separate from the other area, naturally the vocabulary and the total language that they had was different from the other parts.